Well, good morning, everyone. It was at an event like this a few years ago, over the breakfast, I think. I was talking to a colleague of mine with the Manhattan Institute who I don't often see because he's from out of town. And he asked me what I was doing, and I said, well, a lot of different things, but the public pension issue is beginning to perk up again and become a problem, and I expect I'll be doing a lot on that. And he said, I wish you luck, because his own wife had observed to him that the three most boring words in the English language are unfunded pension liability. I had to agree with him at that point, and a lot of the task of discussing this involves attempting to demystify some of that. So I congratulate you on having a high boredom threshold, although I understand that that's not necessarily the only motivation. Ross mentioned to me when I came in today, he said, I think meaning to be cautionary, well, I want you to know there are a lot of people here who are in the pension system or who in unions. And I said, look, first of all, I never speak publicly about pensions without having at least half the people in the room being members of a pension system. I live and work and am based in Albany, where every other person is in a public pension system. I'm in a public pension system. So that's nothing to discomfort me, obviously. I do think that it's possible that today's title, which was chosen by Ross, I think is a good way to frame what is the case I'm trying to make. Perhaps it could be best summed up as what is the case for using the word crisis. And I went to the trouble of looking at my trusty Merriam-Webster's, and the third main definition of crisis, I think, is apt here. It defines crisis as an unstable or crucial time or state of affairs in which a decisive change is impending, especially one with the distinct possibility of a highly undesirable outcome. Yes, I think that's pretty much what I'm going to talk about. The highly undesirable outcome has already begun to develop, but it's not over yet. And so I'm going to kind of walk through the situation with the pension funds and explain to you why this is a concern and why it's a growing concern, and how I would suggest we need to think about it going ahead. To begin with, I do, for all of the observations about the many people in the room, including many friends and acquaintances of mine who are connected with the pension system or with the politics of pension funding, I don't want to assume that everybody here is completely familiar with this. So I'm going to begin by going through just a few of the basics on public pensions in New York and on public pension funding. Now let's go quickly. There are three main pension funds, if you will, in New York State, which you, as New York State taxpayers, which I trust most of you are ultimately responsible for backing up. There's a New York State and local retirement system, which is, I think, the third largest in the country, which has within it two retirement systems. One is NISLRS, the employee retirement system. It's basically every employee of state and local government, of the state government, and every employee of local government outside of New York City, except for school teachers, which we'll get to in a moment. Also within that fund is the New York State Police and Fire Retirement System, which is all local police and firefighters outside New York City. And as you can see, these are two very big systems. There are almost 380,000 retirees in the system, and then there's another nearly 700,000 working members active in the system. Next, there's the New York State Teachers Retirement System, which covers every professional educator who works in the public sector outside New York City, plus a few others here and there in different types of institutions. That's a pretty large pension system. Then, of course, here we are in New York City, there are the funds that concern you most here in New York City. There are the New York City retirement systems. Now, the systems I just mentioned are two big pension systems that have literally thousands of employers belonging to them. The New York City retirement systems is basically 5 systems, or plans, if you will, all held in trust for one large employer, the City of New York. So the largest, I believe, is NYSERS. By the way, members of most transit authority workers and some other workers are also in NYSERS, which is a reflection of the history of the authority and the fact that these people used to be city employees. So the subway workers, for instance, are in NYSERS. So there's NYSERS, that's big. The next largest is the New York City Teachers Retirement System, which is about half as big as the New York State Teachers Retirement System. I think it may have actually more retirees, or close to as many. The New York City, the smallest plan is the Board of Education retirement system, which is kind of a small catch-all that has all sorts of different people in it, not just Board of Education employees or employees of the former Board of Education. And then, of course, last but not least, in the last two, Police Pension Fund and the Fire Pension Fund. Now, how do defined benefit pensions work? Again, excuse me, those of you who are very, very familiar with this or even do it for a living. They deliver a stream of income based on career duration, age at retirement, final average salary, and occupational category. Occupational category being an especially important consideration in New York City, whose plans have a proliferation of occupational pension plans, literally dozens and dozens of them that have grown up over the years for different occupations. Now that stream of income, by the way, is a decent stream of income. In fact, you'll see in today's Times, in the front page of the business section, a story about the funding problems of public pension systems, which also divulges the results of a new nationwide study that an independent actuary or finance professor has done that says that the wage replacement rate from New York State's public pension funds is the second largest in the country. And again, if you look at just broad census figures, the average pension, public pension, for everybody who's ever worked in a public pension system, which includes a lot of people who retired a long time ago, and a whole lot of people who work only for a small part of their careers for government and thus have relatively small pensions. The average pension for all people receiving a public pension who live in New York is about $27,000. Now, the teacher who retires tomorrow is not getting that. He or she is getting about 70 if they've been around for a long time. But the average for every public pensioner in New York is $27,000. That is double the average for those receiving private sector pensions. And public sector pensions generally are, and for a long time have been, more generous than the surviving private sector pensions. We can get into more of this later. Second, they're financed by investment returns, employer contributions, and for most non-uniform personnel, employee contributions. Outside of New York City, a lot of the cops and firefighters were not contributing until recently. A note, when we talk about finance, I don't go into this in a lengthy digression with slides, that one of the key issues, one of the pivotal arguments or focuses of the arguments over pension finance in the United States today has to do with the method used to discount the net present value of the pension obligation. When you're funding something out of a large central pot of money, it's absolutely crucial to know what is the discount rate I'm using to assess the value of this. As you may have heard, the very big difference between public pension funds and private pension funds is that public pension funds are permitted and indeed required by GASB, government accounting standards, to discount their liabilities using their assumed, that is hoped for, rate of return on their investments, which has customarily been 8%. They're beginning to come down in some places. It's still 8 for New York City, although maybe coming down soon. In the private sector, you have to discount your liabilities using something closer to a market rate, that is a risk-free rate. Private pension funds invest as aggressively in many cases as public pension funds. That is, they target a rate of return of 8%, but they discount their liabilities at a lower rate. The lower the discount rate, the bigger the amount of money you have to have available to cover the benefit. A very important consideration, keep it in mind. In New York State, the Constitution, New York is one of a handful of states that not only through court decisions and laws, but through a constitutional provision says that pensions are contractual, not to be diminished or impaired. Now, that doesn't just mean the pension someone retired is already receiving. The vast majority of people, I think, would acknowledge very readily that there should be, for everybody, a protection against a diminishment of a benefit that you are receiving. You should not go into retirement, start getting a benefit, and then have that benefit actually reduced. However, what this also means, and what also creates complications for funding and planning the future, is it's generally interpreted to mean that you cannot tweak the benefit for someone who's now working. Somebody this morning, somewhere in New York City, is just signing the papers now to enter the city retirement system. That person may be a 23-year-old woman who's signing up to be a cop. She, from that moment on, when she gets on the payroll, she is entitled to at least, at a minimum, every benefit that the system offers as of today to people who sign on to that. It cannot be diminished 10 years from now, when she's still 10 years from retirement. It can't be touched. Nothing can be changed. It can only be increased. It can only go up, and that's part of the problem. It's not changeable, it's a complication.